All right, we are rolling. Yeah, man. So everything is on our mind all the time. A lot of chaos to manage. So really the question becomes, and this is something I think about a lot, which is like, how do you break it down? What do you focus on? How do you, how do you navigate that larger picture of all these things that are going on? Um, how do you keep it interrelated and not get overwhelmed? And I think that's why most people don't red pill at all, because it's just so much to manage, right? So
I think it's scary because to scale it from level to level is just like its own thing. Meaning, like, if you're taking care of your tribe and just thinking about the day-to-day communal stuff, your job,
right.
just getting to see your family and all that stuff, you're still, you're doing a good job, but you might not be aware of like what's going on, say, just politically,
Right.
or at least the kayfabe theatrics of the political spectrum that tend to matter. And then the next level, which is war, central planning,
Mm.
and such.
Yeah, and it's like the
So
people
I
who.
think it's
Oh, go ahead. You're good.
No, I was just gonna say, it's hard to sit in all those areas, right? So
Yeah.
I think,
Yep.
a lot of times people just choose one.
Exactly. And that's the thing too, is that like either you're focused on your day-to-day life and you're completely oblivious to politics, or a lot of people who get sucked into politics get so sucked into it that they're missing out on their day-to-day. So it's just a huge balancing act, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I have a model that I've been working with, to kind of help me. And so the way, and this is, I don't know if I think Noah Ravoy. He has some similar kind of thoughts on it, but for me, the simplest way I break it down is into four categories. Like I think about the physical, and it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy and other models. But anyway, so the physical, so like basically making sure I'm getting exercise, eating right, sleeping, just the basics. I've got like a financial, which is where, okay, focus on my job, my side projects, chores, get my finances in order. Three is social, and so that's, and then that break, these all break down into farther domains, but the social includes my relationship, my family, friends, community, nation, all that's grouped together. And then finally my mental, which is just like, a whole world of itself, like, the spiritual, the emotional, all the different interests and stimulation, hobbies and all that kind of stuff. So these are four big kind of categories that I try to use, and I constantly refer back to it, and I kind of say, oh, am I not working out enough? Am I not being social enough? Am I neglecting my finances? It kind of helps me to balance it. So
Right. And that's, yeah, even just at this, this baseline level of like just trying to get by on the day to day and manage our businesses, our assets, our relationships.
yeah,
Man, there's a lot just in that, right? Like that's a lot to weigh on someone's mind alone, let alone. So I never blame anyone. I always tell my people this. I'm like, look, I know some of the stuff I'm saying, it's crazy, right? Like the look on some people's faces when I tell them what's happening is shocked. They're shocked, and I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. They're like, I didn't know that. I was like, yeah. I was like, look, don't worry. Like that's actually not your job. Your job is not to worry about. My job is to be that person that kind of lets people know some of these things that are going on as some type of intermediary that's like just relaying, so trying to sift through all this shit and say, hey, look, this is what everyone thinks going on over here, and this is what they think, and this is what they think. Be like, I think this, but I'm not sure because you don't have this information and data.
right.
And I think it's the best way to discuss this with, our tribe members and stuff like that. Um, because if we come at them with a hard, I mean, you could just say, experts say this is right, and most people will believe you.
Right.
But I think when people people are smarter than they seem sometimes, and once they find out that you've been fooling them or maybe tricking them or lying to them,
Right.
they'll hold it against you for quite a long time.
Right.
So the easiest thing to do is to, I think, like just give them a bunch of truth and say, "Hey, look, I know some of this is going to suck to hear, some of it's harsh, stressful, but here's what I think you should focus on so you don't get overly stressed and overly stimulated by it to the point where you look like me, you look like a fanatical rhetorical
Wizard.
conspiracy guy."
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that like people have this inherent sense of like you've done me wrong, you've lied to me, and so people naturally they gravitate towards truth, and so this is a good thing. I mean, so all we got to do is really show, hey, we're telling you truth and we're demonstrating it, and here's these people that are lying to you and trying to manipulate you. That comes down to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was thinking too, when you going back to this idea of how complex everything is to manage, and one thing that I always think about as a technology person is like how can we leverage technology to help with this, whether that's through, I think AI will be huge, like having an AI assistant that you can like trust with your details, to an extent, to be like, hey, have you exercised today, or maybe you should check on your spouse, like see how they're doing, just kind of
I
help
was just
people.
thinking of this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of
in my
potential
business
there.
actually.
Huh?
If I could have an accountability AI to assist. Number one, I could offer an extra service.
Right.
Number two, it would take something that I don't want to deal with, which is like constantly contacting and
Mm,
bothering people
yes.
to just do the right thing or whatever. But I do want people to know that like I do want you to use the thing. I want you to be inside of the gym, and I want you to be basically like on the right track the whole time. I just don't want to chase you around. I'm too old to be chasing people
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
And if I had an AI that could assist me there, that's big.
Yeah, we should look into it because I mean, obviously the AI is exploding. There's very likely some tools that are out there already, but like with
Mm.
all things, there's probably a lot of room to, develop something of our own potentially. I just came up with the name Accountability AI because I love that
Do
name.
it.
I love accountability as well. So yeah, we should talk more about that. Maybe research what other tools are out there and see because yeah, I think about that all the time. I branded the system that I've thought about for years that I call it this HOS, Human Operating System, and so that's kind of
Mm.
like helping you structure it as it exists, but also like a separate AI that can kind of help. But anyway, yeah,
Right.
a lot of potential there.
Makes sense.
So another thing I want to come back to was you talk about how like people get wrapped up in their day to day, and so they're like not they don't feel like they have time to invest in politics or whatever. So like a really core thing we can do is try to just make the connection for them. Like for example, people are like, oh, my job sucks, and like they're laying off people that are okay. Well, what are the economic conditions that are surrounding this? Like what kind of decisions are being made in Washington that's affecting you and your job, or how much of your tax dollars are going to fight this war over here? It's like all about
Right.
making it. We're not just talking about hypothetical armchair philosopher stuff. The reason we're talking about it is because it affects all of us, and so that's something I always try to like reinforce for people.
I mean, what we have now is propaganda. We have the news, legacy media, and that's what's supposed to be these channels for us. That's what's supposed to be,
Right.
disseminating information to inform us. And now even I think we're seeing I would say even like and maybe someone already has this mapped out and framed out, but like a third generation of media propaganda, because we're seeing now, number one, we're seeing the true deepfake age emerge right in front of our faces, and it's here.
Right.
And people can render things fairly easily now digitally. And we also have like independent journalism that's been bought out and hijacked, I guess, by not just legacy media, but the conglomerates. Because all you got to do is figure out who's paying who, right?
Right.
And once you have events like this, I mean, you start to see who's like shilling for who, in what direction that they're going to start pushing you towards. So,
Yeah.
from that, it's hard to figure out like, oh, was this these events all like supposed to happen? Is this that's the thing that's hard to figure out. But you can certainly see one thing, which is like which way people are leaning at certain times
Right.
and where they're going to steer you, whether it's towards like Zionism or some other leftism or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that is a really good, amidst all the chaos, especially within the media, that's something that really helps me and probably helps a lot of people is just if you can start to build these frames of like what are the big narratives that are out there, like what are the big narratives that are being pushed, and once you have that in mind, that gives you like a lens through which to interpret all this chaos, and like you're saying with this whole Israel conflict with the AI stuff, is it fake, is it not, blah 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 blah, it's just so much chatter and so much mess But it's always so important to keep some kind of frame where it's like, wait a minute, why do I even care about this? Like, my main concern is just why are they can fight each other? They've got thousands of years of conflict, all kinds of crap's happening. I just don't want my tax dollars going over there. Like, that's my main focus, and I also don't want to be distracting my time and my energy towards this like conflict that ultimately is like whatever. So, but I wanted to come back to something really big, and it's basically this idea of, like you said, what you say to your clients. They don't, you don't expect them to be like totally invested or totally informed about all this stuff that's going on. And part of the reason is because you can help them. You can say, oh, well, I've kind of got a good grasp here. I'll kind of give you the TLDR. I'll give you the footnotes to kind of go off of. And this is how it's always been in our society. You have farmers who focus on crops. You have like priests who you can trust to lead you spiritually. You have people who do this for you. And so in a good society where you can trust all your institutions, it works fine. You've got specialization, but obviously the big problem we're in is that all of our institutions are crumbling. There's no trust anywhere. So like people like us as individuals are like, we got to start from scratch. Like, we've got to build our frames from scratch. We got to build our trust from scratch. And then hopefully, but the idea is to either run in parallel or get our institutions back on track so that we actually can trust the media and we can trust our politicians and we can trust the corporations. It's a totally foreign idea, but that's the goal. It's the hope.
We're getting like so little truth now. It's just sprinkled in just enough to keep people, attached to the hook or whatever.
Right.
But even now, the boomers are all like they're acting different. Like, the boomers are even catching on. They're almost dead, but they're catching on.
Yeah.
And they're realizing, like, because they've been made fun of enough that, if they're latching on to like just like one narrative of legacy media or one channel or something like that, like, they're going to get made fun of into oblivion. Like, people are just going to like, you're dumb over and over until they feel dumb and they actually start, being a human and using their brain. And I can see that in the boomers. So it's really interesting to watch, like, at least collectively people are leveling up a little bit on their own.
Yeah.
I'm creating like what would be like sense making fundamentals,
Yes.
which is similar to like what I do with like my other work and projects and stuff. I like to create like foundational things that we can work frames that we can work off of, and they kind of help people grasp this stuff within like 10 or 20 30 hours.
Yeah.
And then from there you can actually start doing some work on your own, and you can trust your own sense making ability, and that you're not just going to end up like going down some rabbit hole that doesn't make sense and then over grasping and attaching to narratives just because of whatever fucking bias you have.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea. Like, that's one of the biggest like services or value that we can provide to people is simple frames, simple frames. Like, this is the funny thing. Like, typically within capitalism, it's like a good or a service, like some tangible thing that people are used to buying or can think about it buying. And obviously, like, we're not really operating quite in that space yet or whatever. It's more of a cultural space, but that is kind of like our product. It's like, hey, here's a simple frame. Here, you can use this. And then it eventually kind of empowers people to start kind of, doing it on their own and start interpreting and operating on their own. And I love the word, the sense making. I hear that in a lot of the like the Game B type meta circles and like the, what's his name, Vervaeke, Jordan Hall, some of those guys, which I like. I like a lot of that. It feels like a more neutral space, for apolitical kind of intellectual space versus like a totally politically charged space all the time. So I appreciate that. But yeah, so those are some good kind of basic things that we can focus on and we can offer for sure.
If people just know like what questions to ask, like if we can teach people the types of questions that are just generally better questions, they'll start acting appropriately. They'll start asking those questions because they'll realize it makes them smarter. Like, people like being smarter no matter what. Like, because
Yeah.
whether they're good or bad, they like being smarter because they end up realizing how much more powerful they are.
Yeah, and it's so funny too. Like, I think about growing up and about how so many ideas out there make people feel like, oh, I'm just dumb. You're smart and I'm dumb and I can't, but it's like you have so much room to a lot of it has to do with our shitty education system and all this kind of crap. Like, people do have so much room to grow and be intelligent, and I agree that's a big part of it. So one thing I wanted to come back to was, we're kind of operating within this frame of relationships. Like that's been kind of one of the themes we've been kind of sticking around. And one thing I started to think about, like a frame within relationships, is kind of like the stages of like, how do you meet someone, how do you develop a relationship, how do you maintain a relationship. But then, I zoomed out a little bit, and this is just to give us a frame and an example of giving others a frame, which is that I think about it like four stages. We've got like individual development, relationship development, community development, and then ultimately like a nation development. So these are like four stages of like development. And so what we've been talking about a lot today is just that individual, and that's where it starts. We've got to get people just like some basic frames that they can use to understand themselves and navigate reality. And then once they've got some good tools, and like you said, they're asking the right questions, and they're starting to empower themselves and realize how much they can do and how intelligent they are, this is great. Like that gets them really going in the right direction. And then it's like, okay, how can I start to build some good relationships out of that? How can I build family, friends, partner, community relationships? And that's the seed that we've planted, and that's the beautiful flourishing that can come about as a result.
Absolutely. Agree. And everything will always come back to being able to, get resources together, and then somehow figure out how to get those resources to help you grow those things together. Whether it's, individual, family, community, or, higher up on the hierarchy.
Yeah, and that's where so going back to that frame that I presented earlier that I use a lot, which is that like physical, it's another I'm trying to keep it down as small as possible. I feel like 4 is a good number, so that's another one I use, is the physical, financial, social, and mental. So those kind of keep all those perspectives in mind. Like you said, a lot of it comes down to resources. That's if you are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy? Have you heard of that one?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Oh, yeah.
that's a good one too, where it's basically like, okay, I got to get my basic foundation together, just security, homeostasis, like air, food, just very basic. Like I need to be able to like not be on panic survival mode. And then it's like, okay, I need to go get a job. I need to get some kind of basic stuff together, and it just kind of goes from there. So, yeah,
Well, that's what we're seeing like now, this big problem that's going to make people start listening a bit more. And they are, they're confused. There's a lot of people talking,
yeah,
but people are listening a little bit more because there's like, I myself, I know I've told people, things are going to get a lot more expensive. There's going to be a lot less jobs. And just, kind of yelling from rooftops about these things, warning people about what was coming if we didn't do, XYZ. And now, XYZ being one of those things, being like some type of UBI system, a
yes,
complete reformation of the tax system, of tax spending, and all our expenses in general, and how we utilize that stuff. And the only way that we're going to get people to listen is to relate with them in a way that is obvious, which is like food is more expensive, fuel's more expensive, homes are more expensive, rent's more expensive, and there's people telling you that inflation is going down while you're literally spending at least. So if you're spending 13% more, right, and you spend $100 a week on groceries, it's like, oh, I'm spending, okay, it's $48 more, it's $500, $600 more a month. I mean, a year. And that's just one thing.
right,
That's just one thing. I'm spending almost $500 to $1,000 more. Sure, it doesn't matter to anyone who makes a certain amount. Like if you make 100 to 130 or 40 or 50, it's like not really a big deal. But then when you start adding everything else, including fuel, how much fuel you use and all that stuff, it starts to add up pretty fast. And if you have a business, then it adds up even faster.
right. Yeah, I think everyone's feeling it, and again, that's just one of those tangible ways that people are seeing what's going on. And then, of course, like those people who do kind of start to ask, well, why is this happening, or how can we do it? A lot of times, they immediately get sucked into all these problems, like, oh, well, Trump did everything good, and Biden's doing everything bad, and that's all we got to
Politics
do
of
is
it. It's
right.
bureaucracy and politics.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a lot of times it's very simple. So, but in general, that's a really good point that I think about a lot. Is this idea that as things get worse, more people start to ask questions, and that's more opportunity for people like us who we've been crying wolf ahead of time. We've been saying, hey, this is coming, blah blah blah. We seem like the crazy person. It's like Alex Jones seems like the crazy person until all of this stuff that he's been predicting comes true, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that gives you some credibility. So that's the importance of going out on a limb and speaking truth and doing all these things, even whenever it's not going to turn into a huge success overnight. It's going to be a slow growth, but it's an investment, and we're investing properly because we know things are going to get worse, and so we're kind of like already thinking about what we can do. We're leaders, and that's a beautiful thing too. Like, in addition to empowering others, like a lot of these conversations I have with like Paul Maneuver and stuff, it just like there's just like this natural empowerment of ourselves that comes back around, and to illustrate how important the role we play in this is, just by being people who we're just asking basic questions and just trying to make sense of it. But like in this landscape of confusion and chaos, we're like, we might as well be the leaders of this whole thing, and we pretty much are. So that's just kind of an interesting perspective that I come back to as well.
We're ahead of the game. For the most part, we're way ahead of the game. And we can see that in the way that we've been kind of disseminating information and doing the sense-making thing for years. And, Brandon and I have talked about this plenty, about how it's like, we're about a year to a year and a half ahead of a lot of things, meaning like we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you can make pretty accurate predictions once you understand like who the players are in these bigger games, and then like how human psychology works, and evolutionary biology and psychology. You could start to make sense of this stuff a lot more, and as you get into the anthropology of humans and all that as well, and history, this all starts to make it's a little bit more like a puzzle than it is just this big chaotic nothingness and mess.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like as we know as individuals, and again, what we're trying to help share with others is just some of these basic frames to help interpret, to help navigate this chaos. And of course, once you have a good frame to, well, I mean, really, it's the same frame either way. Like you just said, psychology. Like if you just know some basic stuff about psychology and evolution, that goes so far to help you understand yourself and your relationships and our society and what's going on. I mean, it's just such a beautiful, simple frame, really, just to say, hey, whatever, like in terms of evolution, just whatever works stays around. And so there you go. Like, why do I think the way I do? Oh, well, that helped us survive better at some point in our history. Or why do why do these things happen in society? Like, why is everyone all wrapped up in this? Well, because X, Y. So yeah, good simple frames to focus on. Evolution, something I always come back to. Psychology, huge part of that.
And with what you're saying, like it makes sense that it's easy to distract humans with like social bullshit, like Hollywood and entertainment.
Yeah.
Because people get, I mean, as far as I can tell, I know too much shit about fucking people in Hollywood. I know that much. It's like what people just, they're interested in each other in this very strange way. And then especially like they're interested in the perceived like hierarchy in which those people fit into it. And you could say ultimately like people like the feminine side of us gets interested in that, all that social bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's played on heavily, obviously, within the media, heavily.
Right.
Like our media now, our propaganda is like geared towards like, oh, pay attention to these weirdos. This shit happened over here. This shit's kind of happening. That's okay. But look at these idiots over here. We're gonna focus on them for like 10 minutes more.
Yeah, that makes me think of like, especially like for some of the younger culture, like I think about the whole Jake Paul like boxing match and all that stuff I see on my Facebook about that. I'm like, this is just, I mean, just like the Israel
That
stuff,
fight last
really.
night was terrible.
Huh?
It ended so poorly, and
Yeah.
I didn't see the whole thing, but and I don't want to like get into it, but like from what I heard, the corner man from the other Paul's who's the, I forget the other bro, the Jake and the
Jake
brother,
and Logan Paul, yeah.
yeah, Logan, his bodyguard came in like or his corner came in twice. And it's like, that's not boxing.
Well, yeah,
You guys aren't boxing.
that's a great point. Like that's something I was thinking all along, is like this is just like some of these things had more integrity in the past, like UFC and boxing used to be more, and now it's just even like degrading even more. It's so much of a distraction. It's so like politicized, and the celebrity, like you said, the feminine social processing, and same with the Israel conflict, for example. It's just all these like these just dramatic, oversimplified, totally distracted takes. It's just like, man, it once again, it's back
You
to
could
this
see the
idea of how
girls
do you
battling on
navigate,
Instagram,
huh?
like over Palestine, Israel. You can see the girls like going at it over Instagram,
Yeah.
like
No, bitch,
Israel,
fuck
you're
you.
just a terrorist, like.
Well, it's like this is why this is where humor is one of those things that really probably has helped me retain my sanity through like satire and parody, because like it reminds me of a meme I saw the other day. It's like, here's like 5 TikTok dances you can do to support Israel or Palestine. Like unironically, that shit's probably out there, and this is why I
That's
love,
all
like
it
I love
takes.
yeah, I love South Park. I mean, it's so funny. Like, as I was saying the other day, like as our legacy media starts to become more and more absurd, shows like South Park, which are absurd, it's supposed to be absurd and satirical, suddenly become more true and more realistic. And
Yeah,
it's just like, this
like
is the very clown
almost like
world.
Babylon B.
Yeah, Babylon B, man, I love it. God, I love it, and I love Stone Toss. I love humor. I'd honestly like to. I think in my long term, I'll probably end up trying to invest or do some cartoons or some stuff like that, just because I love it so much.
Definitely.
Um,
Well, there's so much, there's truth that comes from comedy, and that's why comedy's so important.
that's why it's funny
And
too,
when,
because it's true.
right. The truth is fucking absurdly funny sometimes, to the point where it's like, look, it's harsh and it's weird, but you can do the same thing right back to me. And like us doing this is a little bit better than like us hiding these things because we fucking, it's gonna, hurt us too much or whatever.
Yeah, I think
Um,
humor is like a great tool just for exploring these ideas that are like on the edge or whatever, because it's kind of like you can just like, oh, I was just being ironic, or like, oh, we can laugh it off, or like, oh, I'm not being serious, or or yeah, you can jab right back. It's just like it's such a beautiful tool, really. I love it.
the masculine edge to humor is being, the most truthful you can possibly be with no sarcasm.
Right,
I mean, maybe you can have sarcasm or whatever, but it's full of truth. It's just
right.
full of me being like, oh, like, oh, you're an awesome person, um, even if you're not. But
Yeah,
what I was going to say is the reason why comedy is so important, in my opinion, and one of the things that I like to focus on is like making people understand that the last sense of freedom that you have when you're a slave is your ability to smile and laugh. And the last thing that can be taken away from you at the baseline of your humanity, if you are enslaved or a prisoner or whatever, is your ability to actually laugh. Because once you take that away, you've taken everything away. Once you've taken someone's ability to smile and laugh.
yeah. That is such a fundamental human expression. Like, I think it's so important. I mean, I'm sure there's some neurochemical explanation behind the importance of just like smiling, laughing, and humor. And I agree. Like the way you framed it just now, kind of. I'm sure there's probably some quote in 1984 that is something along those lines. Like, it is very Orwellian, that idea that would be gone. Or it's almost like and another thing I think about is like I guess you could say the converse, which is like thinking about like maybe the Brave New World expression, where like people are smiling and laughing, but it's like, so it's like drug induced, or it's fake, or it's it's off. There's something off about it. And we were watching the One Piece adaptation on Netflix, and there's like a clown pirate who like has a bunch of people imprisoned, and he has a little circus, and he like forces them to laugh. And so it's kind of like this.
Yeah.
It's like a similar dystopian perversion on the other side. And this is why I always love coming back to that like 1984 Brave New World dichotomy of dystopia.
You ever heard of the show Succession?
I don't think so.
So it's basically, I think it's about what Rupert Murdoch and his family or whatever,
Hmm.
but kind of, but it's based on billionaires that own, this big media company and a company just like Disney. And anyways, there's a scene in the last season where so the head guy, his name's Logan, and he's just like the father of these 3 kids who are battling to, basically take the company from him, figure out a way to like take this big conglomerate company away from each other.
Right.
Anyways, there's a scene where the father's like, he's like, everyone's scared of him, of course, because he's like the big honcho, and he just fucking yells at everyone, and he makes them feel like shit. And he's like, make me laugh, say something funny. And he just like has these people trapped in this room who are all scared of him, and you're just like, what do you got? What do you got? Give me something. Make me fucking laugh, will you? Let me do.
I love it. It kind of reminds me
Yeah,
of first just like that concept kind of reminds me of Game of Thrones, like people fighting over or whatever. But it also my wife and I went back and watched Boondock Saints a week or two ago, and that's like it's probably a 20-year-old movie or so. And there's a
I've seen it a
scene.
few times.
Yeah, so you probably remember the scene where the Italian mob boss is like, you're a funny guy, like Rocco. He's like, tell me a joke, and he tells him
Yeah.
this joke. It's like that same kind of situation. And but the
Funny man.
yeah, funny man, yeah. But what really stood out about that scene to me was like obviously the joke was like very like he used the N word and the stuff like, but back then that stuff could just be in movies and like they said it all, like they said fag and like all these stuff that like you can't even say now,
It
and it
was
was
about the mid to late '90s where people started like gasping more
yeah
when things like that were said on screen, and then we were recording things and showing them over and over more,
right.
so people were getting these clips more and more. As you got towards 2000, and people were like, I don't know if we can do that because these people, the ADL or whoever,
Yeah, that's a good point
the
too about
complaining.
like so many things were convalescing around this like within the last 30 years. Like of course one of the probably the biggest is just the internet. And what developed out of the internet is this like hive mind, this like culture where everybody sees everything that's happening all the time and immediately. And so we're kind of developing these like larger narratives. And so, an optimistic explanation might be like, oh, we came together as a society and felt like it wasn't politically correct to explore these things, but there's definitely a more nefarious side where there's like all these this whole thing about like the leftism and the identity politics and the PC culture and the all this kind of stuff that's happening under the as well, which is nefarious and neurotic at best.
You want to hear something interesting? Is and this is all sidebar stuff at this point or whatever, but um the in Hollywood, if you watch like movies from like the late '70s to the '80s and up until about 1990, early '90s, you would see a lot of people make fun of communists, and you'd see and not all the Hollywood and whatever, but you could tell some of the writers and some of the directors were like, oh, I'm going to take a jab at communism like
Mm,
wherever I can.
right.
And I've started to like kind of randomly, not randomly, but like link that to when the Berlin Wall came down. It was like it was like people didn't care about keeping communism at bay anymore or something like that.
Interesting.
And to me, and this is again random sidebar stuff, but like I kind of see it as like what was the Berlin Wall, right? The
Mm.
Berlin Wall was something to divide what the Germans from the communists, and
Yeah, I think
and it
so.
was seen as like a big celebration when it happened. Around, oh yay! Like we finally have this wall down. Yay! This is so good for the world.
Yeah.
We've beaten what?
we
And it's like
we beat what? Yeah.
oh, the communists actually were the ones to be like, hey, we took down the wall. This is all ours now.
Um, I want to look that up actually because I forgot. Like I thought it was like maybe like Germany
I
was
know
divided
Germany's
after
not
the war.
communist per se, like
Berlin Wall. Let's look it up. This is a good reminder. It was a guarded concrete barrier encircled West Berlin, Federal Republic of Germany, 61 to 89. East Berlin, German Democratic Republic. So the Federal Republic of Germany versus the German Democratic Republic. Yeah, I may just have to read up on this. This might be interesting because I've heard some things about it. Yeah, Soviet bloc propaganda portrayed the wall. Yeah, so maybe Soviets and communists on kind of like one side and stuff. I'll have to. Man, I love history. I'm a little rusty on that area, but anyway.
well,
Um,
it's just weird because like my whole life I just went with whatever. Like, oh yeah, that's a good thing, I guess. It's a good thing that we tore down that wall and everyone's what together now. But I think it was more symbolic of something else that people don't realize, which is like, oh, the Bolsheviks kind of got their way.
oh yeah, yeah, that's a big one. One thing at one point I wanted to make was we're talking about like just watching movies and like of the '90s and the '80s and stuff. Like that's just like that is our modern history book. Like you can tell like what were the different focuses and motifs and themes and cultural ideas are being talked about in the last 20 30 years. And Paul and I just went through the Back to the Future series, and we were particularly interested in some of the actual like prophecy and like predictive programming that was happening in those series and some of
Hmm.
the more occult stuff. But even just at its face value, it's so interesting just to look at, you know, I mean, everything. Like, look at their perspective, especially, and this is what we did. I think Back to the Future was so interesting because obviously they are talking about timelines, and so it's like here was a perspective
Hmm.
of of our modern time from 30 years ago. Here's where they thought we, it's like we need to be doing these benchmarks regularly as a society. Like, where do we think we're going to be? It's like a company. Like if you're working in corporate, it's like okay, we're going to set quarterly or annual goals and we're going to get together and say how did we do, how did we need to benchmark ourselves and be like okay, we went totally off the rail in the last 5 years, but at
Well,
least we'll be able to
this
see
is where
that.
you can, yeah, this is where you can look at, everything as propaganda, as I kind of do.
Right.
And I think it makes people uncomfortable because it's like, oh, like you look at music as propaganda too. Like, really, every TV show, everything. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, kind of, but it doesn't have to be such a negative thing. We can take the
exactly.
stigma off of the word propaganda, and we can look at everything that we do as part of a culture. Culture is a cult. Like propaganda is just media. It's just
Right.
things being disseminated. Um, we can make it in a way that like is interesting and is truthful for its recording of the framework of our era, or at least however we're viewing it.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of guys like that I know that are like very like every single piece of every game or show they play, like this is all just propaganda and it's all just totally degenerate and they can't watch
Yeah, it
it.
is.
They're total purity spiralists, and I'm like it's a balance.
Right.
Like you can watch these things and you can enjoy a lot of it, but you can look out for some of the more subversive elements, but you can still you can still enjoy it. Like, and like you said too, it's just like look at it as like this is just a commentary or this is a cultural artifact from our time period, which means it's naturally going to include some good things that we value and it's going to include some of the subversive elements that
Mhm.
naturally work their way in. So, yeah, balance is definitely a big one that I always come back to in that.
I do understand why people get this way, I'll never tell someone like definitely don't do something. It's like it's up to you ultimately.
Right.
But I warn some of my guys about the deconstructions because what they're essentially doing is this is like kind of this existential philosophy type of thing,
Mm.
which is in this deconstructionist philosophy,
Hmm.
which is yeah, you can break down everything and you can see how fucking miserable the world is every single day if you want to. And
Yeah.
this is what the subjective extremists on the left have done through their neo-Marxist frames
Yeah.
and the wokeism and all that shit. We found a way to be miserable about whatever the fuck we can, like any things that are going on in our head, things that are outside of our head. It's all a matter of perspective. But you can do the same thing on the other end of the spectrum, like you said, a purity spiralist, we'll call them. They'll deconstruct in a way where it's like, oh, I can't watch anything now because that's like, I've seen religious people do this. It's like, no, this is like it's too full of sin. I understand that, and you can see it in horror movies and shit like that. Be like, this is occult shit. Like this is fucking
Hmm.
dark shit.
Yep.
But like, I like studying this stuff. I find it fascinating. Some of it disgusts me to the point where like I don't want any part of it.
Right. Right.
But like, if you get so disgusted that you don't want any part of any of it, it's like you're just gonna possibly go to this socially unhealthy place where like you're not able to really
Yep.
relate with people. And that's fine for some people, but like
Yeah.
I don't mind studying this stuff, and I actually see all my watching of these things and attention to this, and I have a band and stuff, and I like to listen to music, and it's studying, but it's also entertainment at the same time. It's up to you to discern like which is which, and at what point like something is unhealthy or doing something to your mind or your soul or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the key that I want to hone in on is like you talked about, like the deconstructionism that happens on both sides, like the postmodernists and the Marxists and the relativists and the nihilists are kind of like taking everything apart and saying nothing matters, and then but also on like
Right.
more the right wings, you've got people kind of like just also kind of doing something similar, like the hyper rationalists and hyper empirical and the schizos and all these kind of stuff are kind of doing something similar, and so it's definitely a balance, and that's something that we talk about a lot. I talk about it with Maneuver a lot. That was something we identified very early on. Is that because a lot of us kind of find ourselves like adjacent to some of the center or center right culture because those seem to be some of the people that are making the most sense right now. But we do see that issue where people are just deconstructing everything and they're not actually trying to construct and build and create. And so that's always a huge balance and something we try to keep in mind
If
for
I
sure.
was to take this to like a religious, conservative religious extreme, this type of deconstructionalism, I could make a case, I could steel man a case
Yeah.
to say, well, yeah, all you should be doing is eating the minimal amount that will keep you alive and just healthy enough so you can keep on, building a hut and having fire and everything else should be spent on just worshiping and praying all day long. Like we can make that argument. That argument can be made in a deconstructionist way. Everything matters too much.
Right. Yeah, that's it's just another one of those balances, and it's a tendency for people, and it's a tendency for people to kind of like not be able to balance, to hyper polarize, black and white. I choose this one. This one seems better, and they go to all these extremes. And like for example, the one you just talked about is almost like a religious extreme or like an anarcho primitivist, like return to monkey, return to caveman extreme. And then you've got yeah, and then you've got people on the other side that are just like totally full on jumping off the cliff and embracing everything that modernity has to offer, even though a majority of it is like in a bad direction. So yeah, man, yeah, always comes back to balance and just trying to navigate that complexity.
Hmm.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So, as far as like building healthy relationships, that's kind of where we started with this whole thing. Um, I think it's totally fair to consider like how you start the like relationships. Like I met you through a group,
Right.
and I was added to that group by a friend of mine, who thought it might make sense that I was there, and now I'm here. And even this interaction here, this discussion that maybe other people will be watching, they get to watch a bonding experience occur.
Hell yeah.
And there's endless amounts of ways that we can meet people, and there's endless amounts of ways that we can build bonds with them. But the only way that we're gonna like build higher trust bonds is to increase the amount of time, especially initially in a relationship,
Right.
is you increase the, and I've noticed this through some of my best friendships, and through my relationship, with my wife, is you spend a lot of time with people at first,
Right.
and the more you can do, you can kind of build that intensity of a bond with someone by like just having discussions. The discussions is the big thing.
Right.
Just seeing how that person thinks, how they act, how they react, if they're consistent over time. By doing that, that's where you really start to crystallize bonds. Because we all have friends that if they called you today, it would be like you just picked right back up from where you were last time, and you were always close with them. But life happens, and sometimes you're not as close with people anymore, so you're not 100% of sure where they're at until you catch up with them.
Right. Um, that was one thing I thought about earlier, just on this topic of relationships. Is kind of like I was curious. Obviously, a big part of relationships is just like partnerships, like spouse, girlfriend, wife kind of thing. But of course, friendships and just community relationships are equally, if not more important. And a lot of the same rules apply, just about how to break down barriers, how to like you said, just spend time together, having conversations and stuff like that. Um, and that's one thing too that I've really noticed because with that idea of barriers and getting to know people is like I am so like I pretty much have no barriers. I'm just like even when I meet a stranger, I feel like you know
Very
I,
open. You're
I
high on
yeah
openness.
yeah I'm like I've always known you, like I don't have anything to hide. It's like it's whatever, like we're getting along. And then insane too, like I can go years without talking to somebody and just pick it right back up. Whereas a lot of people, they're very cliquey, they're very unsure at first. And then when you finally do spend a lot of time with them, then they're kind of like, oh, we're friends now, and we've got to maintain this. And they feel really weird if you go a few weeks without talking. They feel like, oh, we've broken up our friendship. A lot of these are like the default programming. And when I designed Nectar, the social networking app, a lot of the way that I operate was built into the tool. But I learned that most people operate like I described in the ladder. It's very hard to break down those barriers, and it takes time, and that's okay. That's natural, but it's just something to think about.
Yeah, no, people should be guarded.
That's
As in
true.
my opinion,
Yeah.
people should have their guard up because you know what, like, um, when we're younger, our guard isn't up, and so like this is like a thing. It's like, do you do you put your child in armor to protect them from the world and keep them in a bubble? And yeah, they're going to be safe, or do you just kind of throw them out there and say, hey, go see what
Go
happens?
play in the road.
Um, and through life, we go through our experiences, and me, just because of what I've been through, I believe that people should have their guard up, because I know there's dangerous things out there,
Right.
and I know that there's going to be more dangerous things. And the type of environment that's being fostered right now is only going to develop more sociopaths, not less.
Yeah, and again, like it comes back to balance for me. Like it's you don't want to be too exposed where you can potentially get manipulated or hurt, but you also want to be so closed off that you can't form any connections. So it's just a balance somewhere in between. And I do agree, you definitely should have some armor. And so really the goal then is this is where we come in. People like us is like we can help give people some psychological understanding and some frames to help kind of like judge situations and people and kind of like, oh, I get trustworthy vibes from you, or like, I'm gonna be a little careful here. And that's the reason, I'm able to be so open, is because I'm so tuned in to those people that I need to watch out for, and so it's like, yeah, that's a great point.
It comes back to asking the right questions,
Right.
because if people aren't asking, like, I'll tell you what, I've studied a lot of like people with personality disorders and stuff, and done case studies on people, and I'm sure you've seen some psychopaths out there, sociopaths, stuff like that, narcissists,
Yeah.
and when you start asking very particular questions, you'll get very particular answers,
Right.
and it will expose how someone thinks, how someone feels. There was I was on a date years ago before I met my wife, with this girl. I believe she was like a Greek girl,
Hmm.
and not she was like American Greek. But anyways, we were talking about something. We were out on the beach or something like that. We were talking about something, and what did she say? She said, "I hope all those people die," or something like that, about a very, and it was a very general statement
Right.
about like a lot of people.
Right.
And I was like, I reflected it, and I have a tendency to do that with people when they say things like this, especially after having met certain people, who I believe are like sociopaths or psychopaths. When you reflect their language back to them and you ask them, like, you want all these people dead? They're like, do you mean that? Or you're being sarcastic?
Right.
And she was appalled because I just held a mirror up, and I was like, you just said this thing, and you sounded pretty serious when you said it.
Right.
And like, she was just, I think she wanted to like go home at that point because she was so appalled that I
Damn.
like kind of caught her saying this like really atrocious. And I don't think she was a sociopath or a psychopath. I think our in our culture we've normalized certain types of behavior, especially the nihilistic behavior that lets you say like these really drastic things, and maybe even feel that thing a little bit inside.
Right.
But like, to say like, oh, I wish, I wish I could kill all those people. It's like it's like you said kill. You didn't say you wish they weren't here. You
Unalive. Yeah.
didn't, yeah.
So two things that this really makes me think about. One is kind of the plasticity of some of these things, and like basically like when it comes to narcissism or psychopathy or anxiety, like a lot of these things can be, they're more plastic in the sense that they can be healed, or they can kind of come and go. Whereas some things are more like deeply wired, potentially even genetic, like hardwired. And so it's always important to think about that too, because like for example, there's a lot of people that have potential, and especially if their problems are more of these like surface level plastic things that you could heal or help them become aware of and work on, then that's really good. Now, if there's some people that are just like, you are a hardwired genetic psychopath, like that, I mean, we've got to consider those situations. But for an individual, just steer clear. And the other thing too is how conscious are they or are we of our own things, right? Because so many of it, they're just not even aware they're doing it. This is just a way that their culture or just a common saying. So yeah,
Our culture,
huh?
like U.S. culture, like our
Exactly.
culture has,
Yeah, it has plenty of those. Like, yeah, and this is, yeah. So again, like the awareness is so key about become aware of your own kind of layers, and then you can start to see those things in other people. And this again comes back to that frame of the individual, relationship, tribe, nation. It's like understand yourself, and whenever you've really taken your psyche apart, deconstructed it, and then put it back together, then you really understand how you're working, and now you can see how other people are working, and you start to pick up on these things and stuff. So that's really good. And one other point I wanted to make is you said, ask the right questions. And as part of that too is like, just really knowing what to focus on in general. Because, and the reason I say that is because so many of these things, you don't have to ask questions. Like you can either just listen to what they're saying. You can look at their facial expressions. You can look at how their mannerisms. You can just look at how they're living their life. Like there's just so much information to pick up on to very quickly understand what's going on for someone.
you can tell a lot about a person's shoes.
That's funny. Someone actually told me that in like high
I should say
school.
you can tell a lot about a person by their shoes. Yeah.
Someone told me that in high school. He said I always pay attention to their shoes, and I don't know, like that was
It's weird, but
it's
if
true
you
to an
start
extent.
doing it,
Yeah.
yeah, if you start doing it, it'll kind of weird you out.
So what are some examples? Like if you see someone with Crocs on, what are you wearing? Are you wearing Crocs right now? What if you see someone Crocs on? What do you
I'm
think about?
definitely not wearing Crocs. I hate Crocs.
Yeah.
I think.
Is that a
Are you wearing
psychopath if
Crocs?
they're wearing Crocs or a psychopath?
So I don't know if you know this. Someone pointed it out, and I have to go back and watch because I haven't watched it since.
Right.
But like, I guess in the movie Idiocracy,
Yes.
everyone's wearing Crocs,
I've heard
and that
about
was like
that.
way before, not way before, but it was before they actually got to be a thing in what, like 2011 or something like that, 12.
Right.
Um, and that movie came out in like 2003, I think, somewhere around there,
Yeah,
2002
I
maybe.
tell that story because I read about it like so they were looking for some kind of shoes that would be like futuristic and like almost like alien looking or
Hmm.
something. And like Crocs were not very successful at the time. They were like just getting started. So like, oh, we'll try these. And they were assuming no one would ever wear them. But then yeah, like 20 years later, like they actually are popular. So whenever people see them in the movie, they probably don't even think twice about it. Um, yeah,
That
that
makes Mike Judge look like a genius.
yeah, well, I mean, he is honestly like he's been, he's not quite on the level of like South Park in terms of how satirical he is, but like I know King of the Hill is just so on point so much of the time. That's a great show about like conservative values and just like, um, and whatnot. So yeah, Idiocracy in particular was very prophetic though.
He's doing a lot of work at this point, man. He's done a ton of work.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Like I
All
said,
started with Beavis and Butthead too.
yeah, I was thinking that, which I've never seen. I've only seen a little bit of that, so I don't really know what to make. That's obviously a lot more like almost like crude humor and stuff, but it's probably still very on point.
It'll give you a '90s vibe, man. It gives you some tastes of the '90s that are pretty interesting. And because you say you're 29, so you were like under 10 in the '90s.
I was born in '95, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was right around '95 that it got big. So it's kind of funny. It's stupid, but I'm always game for kind of a review and
Yeah,
study of like these things.
yeah. I've
Only
always
for
loved.
so long though.
Yeah, it'll start to melt your brain cells after a while. Like, I've always loved like cartoons and all levels of humor, like even like fart jokes and stuff. But and really, I got into these YouTube poop type humor where it's just like total full on absurdity. Like, no, it's just like literally like explosions and shit, and it cracks me up. But then like, yeah, if I watch for more than like 5 minutes, like I feel like my brain cells are dying.
Like, I'm the biggest degenerate.
Well, not yeah. I don't even know if I call it degenerate. It's just like fucking. It's just so stupid. It just make it just.
Shit.
It just. I think what it is like you talked about It's like
Yeah.
it's like the same thing if you tripped, if you just did psychedelics too much, you would just start to like reality would just dissolve and you would just not be able to make sense of anything anymore. It would just be like what the fuck, you know.
Shit, Joe.
This is what happens if you stare into the void for too long.
Beavis and Butthead is nostalgic for me too, because like
Yeah.
I think I was right around early teenage years, mid teenage years, so it was right striking the chord there where you didn't have shit to do. I didn't have a car yet or anything.
Yep.
Watch MTV.
Yeah, that's such a huge factor too about like how people are programmed, how they grow up, and what they connect with is where you are in your life. Yeah, like if you're especially when you're at that tender age, like when you're first like coming online, like that's around the time that I was watching South Park for the first time, so that really programmed my psyche. And then even on into like college age, you're still figuring a lot of stuff out, so your brain's very plastic. You're taking a lot of impressions from stuff. Um, and honestly too, like when it comes to how we can influence others, like um, these are great demographics to kind of target, because like, and it's kind of a weird thing too, because you're like, oh, you're going after impressionable people, but it's like we trust that we're doing the good work and that we're putting the truth out there and stuff. And really, whenever we work with anybody who's much older than that, it's really a game of you're trying to deprogram them, you're trying to heal them. You're
Right.
like, so it's, and this is what it always comes back to. You hear a lot of people go, oh, well, if our schools could be teaching this stuff from the beginning, it'd be great. And it's like, yeah, that's the goal, but it's going to take some time to get there.
Yes, generations. And I think it's important to focus on the generations kind of not absolutely individually, but to start to be able to compartmentalize like how you approach the different generations and the fundamentals of approaching relationships will be the same and having positive influence on people,
Right.
but the way that you'll be accepted is differently depending on some of your strategies just because the psychology of each generation it shifts just enough that I think people, the this Gen Z crowd, they know more about psychology than the boomers, that's for sure.
Right.
Um, Drastically, so much so that they know to like do things like this in the camera when they talk because it feels a certain way.
We got to start doing
They
that at
they
least.
know, yeah, like all kinds of weird things that you can do that just plays to basic human psychology but this is, maybe this stuff has been going on like this for a long time with technology and kids and older generations. Because the thing that comes with being older is being experienced and knowing some things that you just don't know when you're younger until you experience them.
Yeah.
And you can't be told, you can't be told. You just have to experience it. And the elders kind of sit back and laugh that way. They're like, it's okay. Like you'll find out. They kind of like do this creepy laugh when they know that they're right about something. Like you'll feel pain later, don't you worry. Ha ha ha.
See, this is like that's how things have always been, and I do think that's very healthy and very important to let younger people live life their own way. And I think that's where like I draw a line with a lot of these things, like especially, and this is this gets into the whole other topic, but like for example the trans thing is kind of like this is something that you don't quite learn the hard way and come back from, so we definitely have to be careful, and of course if you die, like things that are so dangerous that you might die, you have to set some boundaries. But other than that, like yeah, you just have to kind of let live
Talk about dumb ways to die, huh?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the. What does that remind me too? Like, even if someone does die, well, other people will learn from your mistakes. So I guess there's still that. But anyway,
Yeah.
cool. Well, I guess we're coming back close to an hour now, which is usually how the length I like to go. I'm trying to think. Like we have covered. We kind of just cover some different topics. But I'm trying to think if there was a unifying theme to this one. What do we think it would be? Like maybe like frame like providing good frames for people or something. No, I don't know. I have to go back and watch it. Maybe we'll see.
We might have to have like it be like something like propaganda, relationships, and entertainment or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll look at it. I
We'll
was gonna joke
we'll
around and do
figure it
like
out.
I was gonna do a title like "Pay attention to people's shoes" or something like that. like that was the one takeaway.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's the easiest route to go because conversations like this, you're probably a little neurodivergent like myself in certain ways. So, but it's easy for us to converse all over the map, which is fine. And we'll get more focused as time goes on the specifics, and we'll kind of narrow that down and concentrate things a bit more.
Yeah, I think
So this is good.
yeah. I agree. Yeah, we definitely laid out a good landscape. We can kind of in the future we can kind of say, hey, we're really going to try to focus on this and keep that frame in mind. But yeah, we'll work through it. But cool, man. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I guess we'll go ahead and stop it there. Thanks everybody for watching. If I end up uploading this, and we'll leave it there.